Let's talk about Israel and Iran and Gaza, because once again those places are in the news. And so I wanted to take a bit of time in a few videos to talk about what is going on in the Middle East and to help us think about it Christianly. And I want to start by talking about something that struck me on Sunday. I'm just speaking after a weekend when Israel launched a military campaign to try and neutralize Iran's ballistic missile capability and its nuclear capability, to prevent Iran from getting nuclear ballistic missiles. And that operation has been codenamed Operation Rising Lion. Well, on Sunday at church we were singing that wonderful, powerful worship song, Is Anyone Worthy? And that song, like a lot of Christian songs, it describes Jesus as the Lion of Judah who conquered the grave. And it struck me, isn't that so powerful? Isn't that the first and the last thing that people need to hear and thinking about what is going on in the Middle East right now? We have this image of the rising lion, but we have that greater, more powerful image of the risen lion, the true Lion of Judah. Jesus, the lion who has risen because he conquered the grave. Jesus, the one who is both described as the lion, that kingly beast with majestic power and authority that has dominion over the other beasts, but also the lamb who was slain. And in fact, in Revelation, when we're told to look and to see the lion, well, it's the lamb that we see, because Jesus is one and the same at the same time. That description of him as lion points to his power, his greatness, his strength, his authority, his dominion. That description of him as the lamb reminds us that he is the one who bore the sacrifice, was the sacrifice, who bore the penalty of our sin, the lamb who takes away the sins of the world, the one who brings forgiveness, the only one who can bring true and lasting peace, not just between nations, but between man and God, can bring peace in our own hearts. Both of those images coming together in a way that can never be true for a nation, can never be true for individuals. And that is my starting point. Because whatever we want to think about Israel and Iran and Palestine as Christians, our starting point has to be, what is it that the people of Israel need to know? What is it that the people of Gaza and the West Bank need to know? What is it that the people of Iran need to know? Where do they need to find hope? Benjamin Netanyahu, in one of his TV addresses, appealed to the Iranian people, basically, as is often the case in these kind of campaigns, to reassure them that they were not the targeted enemy, perhaps sending a message to some of his more outspoken, strident cabinet ministers as well, who have talked about Tehran burning and residents of Tehran feeling the heat of Israel's revenge for attacks on Haifa and Tel Aviv. But he was trying to stir them up to say, this gives you hope, this can cause you to rise up against the regime. And he was trying to speak to capture a mood which I think many people, those that have observed what is happening in Iran, have known over the years. Those of us that have the privilege of knowing Iranians living here, and through them even having some information about what the view inside Iran is now. And it stands in stark contrast to some of the things that we've seen over the weekend. I was struck by a demonstration in London, demonstrators campaigning against Israel's war, marching also against their perception that Britain was supporting Israel. Stop the bombing, stop arming Israel. Well, actually, Britain doesn't really have that much. I think there is some military supplies to Israel, but we're not one of Israel's biggest military suppliers, and nor is Israel one of our biggest beneficiaries. But by marching and waving Iranian flags, I think there was an assumption that these people were marching with and for the Iranian people, the victims of these bombs. But what you start to pick up when you talk to Iranians is this. That first they would talk about the Iranian regime as corrupt. And in fact, I've heard the language of this horrific Islamist extremist revolutionary regime that seized control with Ayatollah Khamenei's revolution, removing the Shah all those years ago. The thing from some of the Iranians is that their country has been kidnapped. A country that was pretty Western, to some extent secular, with a lot of freedom for women, that has become this oppressive theocratic state that it is today. And the response from people that I would hear is this, that they see primarily the harm is coming to them from the regime. That it's always there, that it's the regime that cuts power, that limits access to the internet, that bars communication, that was stopping people from being able to talk to friends and family outside of Iran at the weekend from fear that they would hear news from outside that would affect their perception. A regime that lives in fear of being overthrown. And so whilst probably it was only a small minority that would be said to be cheering Israel on, I'm not sure that's quite the move for them, I've heard that said. There's a sense that at a minimum that this isn't their war. I think one Iranian is quoted in the press as saying, I'm not rooting for either side. Not a sense that Israel is the enemy, but rather that there are two enemies fighting it out. And as always, it's the ordinary people that get stuck in the middle. And what that reflects is what we are hearing from people who work with Iranians that are sharing the gospel, from ministries, missions that have access into Iran, and from lots of Iranians here in the UK that are coming and putting their trust in Jesus. That there is a disillusionment with Iran and with its version of Islam. That's why many people have left the country, have sought asylum. And that's why people are looking elsewhere. And that's why I want to come back to this. What is the hope that Iranians need? It's not the hope of Operation Rising Lion. It's the hope of the risen life of Jesus. And we want to say that about the people of Israel as well too, don't we? The Jews back in the land of Israel. And Jews all around the world as well. We as Christians believe that Jesus is the Messiah. That's where the term Christian comes from. Christ, the sort of the Greek and then anglicized variant of Messiah, the anointed rescuer who's come to deliver his people, the one promised by the prophets, the one that even the law points to, the Torah points to. We as Christians believe that Jesus, Yeshua, is the hope of God's people, the promised one. For they too need to find their hope, not in chariots, not in tanks, not in aircraft and missiles, not in an iron dome. They need to find their hope in the risen Lion.